All right, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining again for another meeting of our ACC2 and ACT working group. We have another good agenda for you. Wanted to quickly kind of run through what to expect for the rest of the year, the rest of our kind of time together. So in November, the November meeting will be spent partially, at least partially, on reviewing recommendations. So the way that the team is planning to capture recommendations is that everybody will receive a link to a survey or some sort of tool after this meeting where you will be asked to kind of submit your recommendations, your proposed recommendations for the committee's consideration. This is only going to work group members. Okay. And then the team will put all of the different concepts together into a set of recommendations that the committee can review. So each individual recommendation that's sent in is not guaranteed inclusion in the final report, but each recommendation will be folded into some sort of concept. So that's the plan for November. And then in December, there should be a final report for everybody to review that will have to be turned over to the governor by end of the year. The governor and the legislature. So that's what we're looking at for the rest of the year. Anybody have any questions or concerns with that process? Hearing none, we will jump right into the meat of our meeting. Turn it over to Secretary McElwain, MDE, to talk about any updates around policy and litigation. All right, thank you for that. Oh, I do see it. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So sorry. You went through it really quick. So the recommendations we're submitting recommendations as work group members between now and the November meeting.
Yeah, I think they'll provide a deadline in the email. I mean, not all the way to the November meeting because the staff will need some time to work on it. But I would say like you'll get an email. Maybe you'll have a week or 2 weeks to kind of look at it and send something back. And then the team will put together a list of recommendations using what you submitted for review by the committee at the November meeting.
And then the November and December meetings will be discussing like those recommendations. Because I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that like, you know, the recommendations, having done, you know, we had talked previously about this being, you know, based on consensus. I think when you're talking about actual text, you know, there needs to be sufficient time to have response to that text to actually go through and work out where any disagreements are if you want this by consensus. So if the goal is still to put them out by the end of the year, it's not clear to me that like 2 meetings is going to be sufficient to do that. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, are we going to be having like will there be a draft that we can at least like mark up and sort of see as the recommendations as they come through? I mean,
yes, you'll receive a draft before the December meeting following the discussion at the November meeting about the recommendations. And then like the team will work to put all of that together into a draft that will be circulated. And then the work group members will have an opportunity to comment on that draft either through email beforehand. You know, if you're emailing one person individually, one staff member individually, and then we can have that larger discussion in December. If an additional meeting is needed, we can schedule one.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little concerned about the idea that the work group members are not having direct contact with each other. So I guess I would encourage that we have a more like active drafting process, because having to work through a mediator to ensure to capture what the actual issue isn't actually like an effective strategy for like getting to the root of any textual disagreements. And I feel like often when you can actually have like a conversation in like even an offline conversation, right, directly in the document through some of this, I
Right,
guess,
so-
yeah,
Sorry, just to pause for a second. You can't have offline conversations because that would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So that's why offline conversations, that's why I specified that you'd be, emailing one person directly. If the whole team, if the whole work group is working on something outside of the public eye, then that's a violation of the Public Meetings Act. So if you have thoughts about the process that you'd like to recommend that are within the scope of the Public Meetings Act, I think totally open to suggestions here.
okay. It's, yeah, I guess it's not clear how sending a recommendation to you, how working this through the team isn't also a similar process, but I guess I'm not familiar with Maryland state law, so I'll have to take your word on that.
Okay, great. Any other questions? All right, let's jump into our presentations.
All right, thank you. I think it's time for us at this point to give an update on all the things that are going on in terms of litigations and regulations that are coming out regarding ACC 1 and 2. So I'm gonna turn it over to MDE Director Chris Hoagland is going to give a presentation. We're gonna talk about ACT. There's a minor regulation that's coming out. I think we need to clarify that. So Chris is going to talk about that. We're going to also talk about the emergency ACC 2 regulation. Okay. And I think that's a really, the point of that is to give more clarity on what's going on with ACC 1, right? Not 2. Okay. And then we're going to talk quickly about the needs assessment. I believe that's it. All right. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Secretary, and thanks everyone for having me. Chris Hoagland, Air Director at MDE, providing a status update on ACC and ACT regulations. Next slide, please. So Clean Cars 2, ACC 2, and Advanced Clean Trucks, or ACT, are both in litigation related to the federal government's action to remove the authority that the states have to implement those programs. So implementation and enforcement of those programs is currently paused while that litigation plays out. The federal government took action. Several states have sued to challenge that action. That's going to take a while to resolve. In the meantime, through that, as well as the executive order that created this working group, those programs are not going to be enforced in Maryland. They're not going to take effect for another couple of years, but in the meantime, they would be paused. However, there are still updates to those programs that are going through that are necessary to ensure consistency. As a reminder, the states all have to be consistent in these regulations as a legal matter under the Clean Air Act, and therefore we also have to do it to remain in compliance with Maryland law that requires us to maintain these programs in a legally consistent way. So we'll be talking about some of those updates right now. And also another action that's pending with the feds is that they are going to be changing all the federal standards for cars and trucks at both EPA and the part of DOT that manages the CAFE standards, the fuel economy standards. So next slide, please. As a timeline refresher, right now we are in 2025. There are many model year 2025 vehicles for sale. These regulations all operate on a model year basis, not necessarily a calendar year basis. However, we are in calendar year 2025 and there are model year 2025 vehicles out for sale right now. Model year 2025 was the last scheduled years for what we now call Clean Cars 1. As a reminder, Maryland and the other Clean Cars states have been implementing the Clean Cars program for about 15 years. Since there's a new version of the program coming called Clean Cars 2, we now call the old program Clean Cars 1. So we are still in Clean Cars 1. Clean Cars 1 was scheduled to last through model year 2025. And then starting in model year 2026, the new program Clean Cars 2 begins to take effect. Understanding that in Maryland, it's actually model year 2027 when that program will take effect. So we are right now finishing up Clean Cars 1. The federal actions that have challenged the programs did not affect Clean Cars 1. They affected Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. So we are still implementing Clean Cars 1. The way we adopted Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks in Maryland, they were scheduled take effect in model year 2027, not model year 2026, like in some other states. And now the executive order that created this working group said that in the first 2 years of those programs, model year 2027 and model year 2028, the state is going to exercise enforcement discretion. So we will be easing into those programs more slowly in later model years, okay? And we're here right now finishing up Advanced Clean Cars 1, which is different from Advanced Clean Cars 2, which is the subject of this working group. It's complicated. I'm seeing nodding heads. Any questions, please interrupt me. In the meantime, next slide, please. So there's a regulatory action on Advanced Clean Cars 1. Advanced Clean Cars 1 had been scheduled to complete with the completion of this model year 2025. Earlier this month, California issued an emergency regulation that would extend particular pieces of Clean Cars 1 beyond model year 2025. Specifically, it would extend the criteria pollutant regulations for fuel burning vehicles. Criteria pollutants are the air pollutants we regulate under the Clean Air Act because they affect air quality. This is not a greenhouse gas. This is not an EV requirement. There are requirements within clean cars for EVs. That's the primary topic of this working group. There are also requirements, pollution requirements for gas and diesel burning vehicles that come in the form of a certain amount of pollution that can be emitted per mile out of their tailpipes. So those elements of the program for Clean Cars 1 will be extended beyond model year 2025 under the pending regulatory action. There's a certification process where the manufacturers demonstrate that their gas and diesel burning vehicles meet those standards, and they're certified by California or EPA. And then that allows them to sell those vehicles in the states with the standards. So if you want to sell a vehicle in Maryland, it has to be a certified vehicle. It's in nobody's interest that the certification process halts if all of the regulations are paused. So what California is proposing to do here is to extend the old standards into beyond model year 2025 while the new standards are up for litigation, right? The litigation on the new standards will take a while. It's going to create some limbo. So California is extending the old standards effectively as a backstop, right? So that manufacturers can continue to certify vehicles and we can all be prepared for what happens next and there won't be a lapse in coverage. I want to stress that this is only for the pollution, tailpipe pollution standards for gas and diesel vehicles. This does not extend the EV part of Clean Cars 1. So the annual EV sales goals are not being extended from Clean Cars 1. Nor does it extend the greenhouse gas standards, only the ones for nitrogen oxides and non-methane organic gases. They're just pollutants that come out of tailpipes that affect air quality. So this is meant as a backstop continuity, given the uncertainty with litigation. So MDE we will have to make conforming updates to our regulations next year as California continues the process. They've issued an emergency regulation, similar mechanism like we have in Maryland, where a regulation takes effect right away. And then that action is followed by another regulatory action to make that permanent. So once that's complete, next year we'll be amending our regulations. Are there any questions on that? Okay, and again, this is all for Clean Cars 1, not Clean Cars 2. All right, next slide. There's also a pending regulatory action for advanced clean trucks. We proposed this regulation a little while ago. The regulatory hearing was this morning. The comment period closes today if anybody wants to make comments. This is incorporating some flexibilities that the states agreed to incorporate before all the federal stuff happened. So these were flexibilities that were agreed upon with the industry. So the states are all following through, putting these in our regulations, so that if the litigation over this program ends up in a place where the program is now in effect, these flexibilities we agreed to put in place are in place. And so generally, they are giving longer compliance windows for manufacturers subject to the Clean Trucks regulation, so that if they are ever behind in 1 year, they have 3 years to make up that deficit before they would be failing to meet the regulation. There are changes to how vehicles are accounted for, and specifically it's counting for vehicle deliveries, not necessarily sales. Before, in order to apply, manufacturer would have to demonstrate that the vehicle was delivered to the end purchaser. Now they would just have to show that it was delivered for sale in the state. So deliveries to dealers would count. And then clarifying the applicability for Class 2B and 3 vehicles. These are vehicles that are medium-duty vehicles, and currently, if a manufacturer sells an electric truck, say one of those trucks, it's greater than 8,500 pounds. It's a Class 2B vehicle. It could count as a medium-duty vehicle on advanced clean trucks or as a large passenger truck under advanced clean cars. It's clarifying every manufacturer will have the option for some of these vehicles that are in this in-between category for which program they want to direct their credit to. It's clarifying the credit. So like I said, we just had the hearing this morning, comment period closes today. The goal is that these flexibilities be in case the regulation comes back into effect. Okay, and then final slide, an update on the Advanced Clean Trucks Needs Assessment. The Maryland law that directed us to adopt the Advanced Clean Trucks program also told us to perform a needs assessment and deployment plan, looking at all the things that need to come into place for the state to electrify trucks. The executive order that created this working group paused enforcement of the Advanced Clean Trucks program in 2027, and it paused enforcement in 2028, pending the publication of this study. So we have to publish this study by December 1st. We do plan to do that. The law required us to coordinate this study with several agencies. We're right now in the phase of finalizing the agency coordination process, getting all the other agencies' comments on the draft and the analysis. And then we'll have a final version ready for publication, delivered to the General Assembly by December 1st. That's it. Questions?
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. There are no questions. We'll move on to our external presentation for today. Megan, would you like to introduce our speaker today from the Climate Alliance?
Yes, I'm so pleased to welcome our wonderful partner, Casey Kadams, who is the head of the U.S. Climate Alliance. Maryland is one of the states who's a proud member of the U.S. Climate Alliance, and Casey formerly worked for the U.S. EPA prior to that in the Biden-Harris administration. So Casey, go ahead and take it away, and I think we will share your presentation on the screen. Can you do that, Caitlin? There we go.
That's impressive technology. Thanks. Thanks so much for the warm introduction, Megan. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be in Annapolis with all of you, but excited to be here to chat about work that is ongoing that Maryland is participating in with 12 other states as part of this new multi-state partnership to advance the next generation of solutions to support clean transportation in states across our coalition. So we'll go ahead and just dive right in, and we'll hopefully leave some time for questions if folks have any. But I'm Casey Kadams, Executive Director here at the Alliance. Great to be with you all. Next slide. Just a little bit about us. For awareness, for those who are not familiar, the U.S. Climate Alliance is a bipartisan coalition of 24 governors who are all collectively committed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. Maryland has been a longtime member of the Alliance and a fantastic contributor to our work. We were founded back in 2017 in response to the first withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Agreement, and over the last 8.5 years have done a lot of work to sustain America's net zero transition and keep us on track through multiple fluctuations in federal policy and federal approach. Next slide. This is just to give you a sense of sort of the broad swath of states who are participating in the Alliance. As you can see, Maryland is joined by a lot of really fantastic partners across the coalition. We've got representation in every region of the country and are really proud to support collaboration and coordination across each of these states. Next slide. So this is a slide that I think is just really helpful to sort of situate ourselves in the conversation in the moment that we find ourselves in. And I, expect that this is not unfamiliar to a lot of folks in the room, but, we measure our progress collectively across our 24 states and territories, and we hold ourselves accountable to our collective emissions reduction targets. We report annually on our progress towards those targets. And so these are data actually that are going to be released in a couple weeks in Brazil at the COP around sort of the Alliance's latest progress. But as you can see, we were making really great progress on an economy-wide basis in reducing our collective net greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors of the economy. Across the Alliance, our emissions are down 24% over the last 2 decades. which is, a really, really impressive feat. Folks in Maryland should feel really proud of your contributions to this collective progress. And it does put us on track for meeting our 2025 emissions reduction target. But within that, if you look a little bit deeper within the numbers, you can see that transportation is a large share of our collective emissions that remain and is the largest and one of the most stubborn parts of our collective greenhouse gas emissions that remain. So during that period of time, transportation emissions are down 17%. I do want to say that while that number is lower than 24%, and so we're making less progress than we are sort of on an economy-wide basis in transportation, when you compare that to the rest of the country, transportation emissions in the rest of the country are essentially flat over those 2 decades. And so this is really significant progress. And it's a demonstration of the value and impact that ACC2, ACC1, ACT, and a lot of other nation-leading policies that Maryland has led on have contributed to a really significant reduction. But as you can see, we've made really, if you just look at sort of that yellow bar in the top graph, the electricity sector has seen a 45% emissions reduction over the last 2 decades. And what we have remaining is, a really significant share of transportation emissions. And if you go a little bit deeper within those emissions, passenger cars and trucks are actually the #1 single source of greenhouse gas emissions across the Alliance, which speaks to the importance of, I think, this work and to this working group. And so I just want to say hats off to all of you for being here today, for contributing your time, energy, and expertise to this work, because as you can see, it's really critical to meeting our climate goals. Next slide. This is just to give you all a sense of sort of the landscape that we find ourselves in nationally. The federal rollbacks that we've faced here in DC have had a really significant impact on the trajectory for our transportation emissions over the next few decades. So if you look at that sort of dotted line, that was the trajectory of where transportation emissions were expected to go under the prior administration's policies. And then if you look at the dark line, which is substantially higher, particularly as you go out to 2050, that is a reflection of the current federal policy. And in particular, it reflects sort of the loss of ACC2 and ACT waiver approvals from EPA, which is obviously, as Serena said, subject to ongoing litigation. But without those waivers, the curve bends significantly upward. The loss of federal tax credits is a big impact. And then, of course, at the national level, we also know that the EPA is currently proposing to eliminate all greenhouse gas emission standards for all classes of motor vehicles. And so the loss of federal standards, the loss of our more stringent state standards, and the loss of tax incentives for consumers are having a really significant impact on our ability to drive down emissions in the transportation sector, absent additional state action. Next slide. Part of the reason why, and the impetus for this new multi-state partnership that Maryland is part of is just sort of the destabilizing impact of some of those actions. In addition to sort of driving up emissions reductions, it has also been really challenging to automakers and auto workers who, I think we are left with sort of a rapidly changing regulatory landscape without a lot of stability or certainty. And so, governors across the alliance have expressed concern about the impact that has on our competitiveness. We see that EV sales across the world are growing rapidly, with Chinese automakers, making up a lot of the share of that global market. And so in part, the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition is a response to some of the actions that we've seen at the federal level, which have included not just the loss of standards and waivers, but also the attempted termination of NEVI funding, which thankfully is, back on track. Tariffs and supply chain impacts from some of the administration's trade policies, the elimination of consumer credits through the reconciliation bill, the proposed fee for EV purchases and EVs owners that are being proposed as part of the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Package, the dismantling or the attempted dismantling of state clean vehicle programs, and then again, the major regulatory uncertainty around the future of federal GHG emission standards. Next slide. And so in response to that, Maryland joined together with 10 other states to help launch this new multi-state partnership called the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition back in the spring. And the goal of this partnership is really to sustain collaboration across states on the next generation of solutions, to make sure that we are continuing to make the transition to cleaner and more affordable cars, to support automakers and auto workers through that transition, and to make sure that we're safeguarding state clean air authority under the Clean Air Act through some of the assaults that we've seen. Next slide. And so this goes through some of the goals. Happy to speak more about this, and more information is available on our website. But some of the goals that are sort of embedded as part of this new partnership are developing solutions that make it easier, more accessible, and more affordable for all Americans who want to buy an EV and drive an EV to do so, recognizing that the price point remains a significant barrier for many of Americans. Some of the goals within that are increasing the availability of clean car options, expanding accessible charging and fueling infrastructure, both in people's homes and in their communities. So again, sort of thinking about how can we make it cheaper, more affordable, and more accessible to own and operate an EV. There's a commitment to continue making progress towards the goals of state clean vehicle programs, which again, hats off to all of you. That's exactly what you're doing as part of this working group, to continue making progress towards the goals of our clean vehicle programs at the state level, even if, even through the period of litigation and sort of uncertainty related to the status of those programs. And then a key part of this is making sure that, we are defending the longstanding authority that states have enjoyed under the Clean Air Act to adopt the transportation solutions that best meet your needs and best help support Maryland families and communities. I think there is, some broad concern about the efforts to undermine state authority under the Clean Air Act, and we want to make sure that we're preserving and defending Section 177 of the Clean Air Act that allows Maryland to adopt transportation solutions that best meet your needs. And then the final piece of this is, again, sort of, I think exactly what this working group is already doing, but states are fostering some collaboration and engagement with the full suite of people who participate in this space. So manufacturers, suppliers, dealers, unions, charging and fueling infrastructure providers, and others to support the development and implementation of these solutions, because we know that it's going to take all of us to turn these ambitions into reality. Next slide. One of the first things that that this partnership helped sort of usher through, since it was formed earlier this spring, was to launch a new nationwide campaign to help raise public awareness of the federal clean energy tax incentives before they expire. Obviously, there was a big push before the September 30th expiration of the EV credit, and we'll go through some of the really great impacts from that effort. But we've joined together not just Climate Alliance governors, but with climate mayors. So sort of tapping public officials at all levels of government to help make sure that people know about the incentives that are available to them and how they can save money on these cars up front using these tax credits now, and then also how these cars can help them save money on fuel and maintenance costs down the road. Next slide. This is just to give you a quick example, but across our coalition, states uplifted really great messages on social media channels, on their newsletters, on public websites, in public events, in op-eds, to help people know about the credits that were available to them. I think a lot of Americans still, were not aware of this sort of expiring credit. And so, a lot of credit to Maryland and our fellow states for the work to help make sure that as many Americans as possible could claim those incentives while they were still available. Next slide. Actually, can we go forward one slide and then I'm going to double back? This is just to give you a sense of sort of the impact, but I'm sure folks here have seen the Q3 numbers came back really, really positively. Ignore the California part of this. This was just a really great graphic, and so we wanted to use it for the sort of US nationwide sales. But you can see EVs continue to enjoy an exponential growth in the United States. And so I think, this is a really important thing for us to sort of build into the narrative that the EV transition is absolutely moving forward and not slowing down. And in Q3 actually broke 10% of the market share in the US nationwide last quarter for the very first time. And I think, again, that is a real credit to Maryland and the other states who have helped as many people as possible take advantage of that credit. Can we go back one slide now? This is just to give you a sense of what other states are doing across our coalition. Some of it looks very similar to what this working group is, so you guys are in really good company. Washington last month launched a new effort called Zevergreen, a portmanteau that I think we can all be relatively jealous of, but that is their statewide effort where they are sort of having dialogues with all of the in-state participants and partners in this community to figure out what they're going to be doing through their next legislative session and developing their own suite of solutions. So a very similar model to what you all are currently doing. Colorado this month announced that they're going to be increasing their point of sale EV rebates to help make up for the loss of some of the federal credits through their Vehicle Exchange Colorado program. California, I assume you guys have covered this in a previous meeting, but published a report to its governor detailing a number of options that are available for their state to continue sustaining the transition to cleaner cars in the face of federal rollbacks. And New York, in a very similar way to you all and Washington, launched a new interagency working group this spring to figure out how they can accelerate clean vehicle adoption through this period of uncertainty. Next slide. Let's go one forward again. So this is just sort of a slide to give you a sense, and we can spend a little bit more time talking about this if folks have questions. But a big part of the conversation within the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition right now is assessing what are the policy solutions and opportunities that states across the country might consider moving forward on, recognizing that those solutions are going to look really different in every state, and what makes sense for Maryland may not be exactly what makes sense for Washington or Colorado or New York or New Mexico. But folks are sharing sort of the lessons that they're hearing, what they're considering, and what may make sense for them. And they're sort of lining up in some similar threads and similar patterns. One of those key patterns is thinking through how states can work with utilities around transportation electrification, with a recognition that utilities are going to play a really critical role in making sure that this transition is possible, and importantly, that it can be done in a way that sort of supports the resilience and strength of the grid, particularly as we're facing significant load growth from data centers and other sources, and also how we're doing it in a way that will ensure that consumers can reap the most savings from these vehicles that we know save people money on fuel and maintenance costs. Another sort of key thread that states are exploring is the use of states' purchasing power, and how state procurement can help states lead by example, create continued incentives in the direction of cleaner cars, but leveraging basically the purchasing power of state government. There's, I think, also opportunities to align with local governments and sort of creating sort of an alignment of that purchasing power, but that is a key area that folks are exploring, including California. And then the final is sort of thinking through the ZEV and infrastructure deployment itself, and how those opportunities, whether that's through sort of public charging infrastructure, helping people get access to charging at home, doing some electrical work in people's homes to make it possible to do charging at home. But how can those solutions be done in a way that both supports workforce development for the auto sector, for electricians, for good paying careers sort of throughout the ecosystem, and how can we support industry growth and stability? And one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, that I think has been a big concern about sort of the state of federal uncertainty right now is that we've created a world where states have and the federal government previously have set some really robust plans and trajectories for the growth of EVs. And now, they're getting a lot of very different kinds of signals from the federal government about whether or not that is the trajectory or not. And more than anything else, I think there's an opportunity here to provide the kind of regulatory certainty and stability that the industry needs to understand that this transition is absolutely going to be moving forward. And we want to do it in a way that is predictable so that folks can make the right investments now, and that we can also help build the good paying careers who will do this work. Next slide. And then I just want to sort of mention that this is not the only place where states are collaborating on policy development and policy solutions. And so I just want to sort of name, Affordable Clean Cars Coalition is really specifically focused on passenger cars and trucks, so not really getting into the medium and heavy duty space. But we are partnering really closely with our friends at NESCOM, who I hope that many folks here are very familiar with, who coordinate amongst air regulators. And they are continuing to move forward on their MOU and their task force around sort of ZEV deployment, and then specifically doing a work stream on medium and heavy duty work to make sure that we're supporting in particular the charging infrastructure that are necessary for us to get medium and heavy duty trucks to the threshold that are laid out in the ACT rule. Next slide. That's sort of the presentation that we have today. I'm happy to take any questions. Serena, Megan, hopefully this is helpful to the group. I've listed my contact information here as well as that of Mark Teschauer, who's our senior policy advisor and covers the transportation work. He is much smarter about this than I am, and I think we'd be happy to have further conversations with anyone in the room if it would be helpful. But I can pause here.
Thank you so much, Casey. That was very informative and helpful. Questions for Casey?
I have a question, Shayna. Casey, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
So I'm going back to the slide, they're not numbered. So it's the impact of the federal rollback, right? That shows the anticipated projections under former federal climate policy and then under current federal policy. Is there any sense from the three rollbacks that you lay out, which one or ones are expected to have the greatest impact, right? Was it the waiver of the EPA approvals? Is it the federal tax credit piece, right? Which amongst those is perceived in the projections to have the future greatest impact?
It's a great question, Mark. I can go grab Kristen across the room, but do you happen to know off the top of your head which of these has the greatest impact?
I don't have that answer off the top of my head, but yeah, I believe these were all factored as part of the analysis, and this chart here reflects impacts to Alliance members.
Yeah, we can
Oh.
definitely get the answer to that question. I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, I think I will say that this is transportation emissions in the U.S. Climate Alliance, and so just to sort of contextualize these numbers, I think the reality looks different when you look at sort of the national numbers versus in-state, in alliance states. Because so many of our states have adopted ACC2 and ACT, I would assume that the loss of those waivers is, if not the biggest, among the biggest, because the loss of federal emission standards matters less in a world in which we're able to implement our manufacturing requirements in those two rules. And so I think generally what we see in the alliance is that the loss of federal standards has less of an impact in our states because states have adopted more stringent standards anyway. But I do think that each of these three has a fairly significant impact. So I don't think one of them is like significantly outweighing the others. I think they're all a pretty big hit.
Thanks, Casey. Secretary?
Thank you. You pretty much said what I was going to say, but I do want to add, even if the waivers were still intact right now, but the federal tax credits were taken away, we would still have a real serious problem.
Thank you. That's one of
Yeah.
the reasons I asked the question.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand what is the impact of regulatory policy versus not having money available, right? And how do those play into it? I understand that they're linked, but thank you. That's.
Yeah, the incentives is a part of all of this. You have to have money to
Sure.
move, to move the markets. It's just so important. Do you have anything on that, guys?
Okay. Third questions for Casey and or Mark?
Can I ask one more? No one has one. On time or account time?
Yeah, go for it.
So on the chart that shows the impact, essentially, trying to get in all the marketing efforts prior to the expiration. So we're going to electric vehicle sales in California and the US. And so there was a noticeable drop every year going back to, well, for the last 5 years, essentially since COVID, where Q1 is always lower than every other quarter in each calendar year. Has there been sort of any assessment? Is that consistent? I could ask Peter if he was here, and I know he's not, with just traditional gas-powered vehicle sales as well? Because I would have thought that, given that we hear that the money kind of runs out a lot of times on a lot of these programs, that Q1 would be very heavy because people want to take advantage of the financial opportunities that are available. So.
I can offer the,
Sorry.
Q1 is notoriously the slowest time of the year for new auto sales.
Okay.
Everyone spends all their money for the holidays, get into January, belts tighten, and then we ease up in the spring.
Thank you.
Yep.
Very helpful. Thanks, Bill. Other questions for Casey and team?
I can actually also double back. I just grabbed our analytical lead if it's helpful to dive a little bit more. I don't know if it's possible for me to share my screen quickly, but I think at a high level, what I want to just sort of underscore is I think Serena's right on the money. The biggest impact is the loss of the federal tax credits. When we look at sort of the impact, I think sort of the number one greatest hit is the loss of the credits, followed then by the loss of the federal standards, followed by the loss of the waiver.
Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that because the loss of the federal tax credit only affects sales that extend beyond ACC2 requirements. right? Because it has to be additive. So I'm just surprised that you're saying that there would be a larger share of emissions than would be required, like additive to ACC2 and ACT from federal policy in those states. Is that because there aren't that many ACC2 states in your? Yeah, I guess I had based on your prior
Yeah.
explanation, that seems reversed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm now worried that I'm misspeaking. I think maybe, Shana, what I'm going to recommend doing is following up with a specific graph. I'm looking actually at a graph that combines both power sector and transportation sector incentives. And I'm worried I'm giving you the answer that is actually improperly, that I improperly said was a transportation only number, but is actually specific to sort of the broad suite of federal rollback. So why don't I propose that I will get a transportation specific graph that sort of gets a little bit more into the granularity of those three rollbacks and send that to you guys. And is it possible, Megan, then to send that around by email after the meeting?
Oh, yeah, of course. That sounds great, Casey.
Great. But yeah, we can certainly get that for you. And then I think for what it's worth, we also regularly commission emissions analysis. We work closely with E3, who's our #1 sort of analytical partner. And so I think that if there are other sort of key analytical questions that would be helpful to this group for us to assess, evaluate, and get information on, we can certainly do that and would be glad to make that available to this working group.
Thanks, Casey. Other questions for Casey? All right, Casey, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate your contributions and we look forward to receiving that follow-up.
That sounds great. I just want to say, keep it up. You guys are doing great work. I know this is a really hard time and a hard process, and you guys are doing a great job of bringing people together across the spectrum. And so just don't lose hope. Keep it up.
Thanks, Casey. We have a lot of hope. I think, this group is really, I think, gelling. I think everybody understands the different perspectives that we're all looking at. So I feel very hopeful for a positive outcome here. And again, really appreciate you and Mark coming today.
Happy to do it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Casey. All right, our last part of section 1, where we get a 10-minute break. I've got a number of folks who are going to lead us in discussion. Joe and Bo and not Josh.
Sorry. Yeah, from the Sierra, filling in for Josh today.
Is it sorry?
Yeah.
And sorry from the Sierra Club. So I don't know who the best person is to turn it over to, probably Joe, because why not?
I will pass the torch to my colleagues here if they're so inclined. Glad to go later.
Why don't you start, Joe, because you're the first person.
All right. I will be extremely quick. In terms of what would be opportunities for us and kind of piggybacking up some of the comment received to date from various stakeholders is, continued focus on charging that kind of was within our remit and our work to date. Corridor charging is an area of focus and an opportunity for us to double down and set goals and metrics around. Community charging will be new. Next RFP for NEVI funds.
Solid, maybe.
Maybe more to come soon.
Yes.
But we're going to be moving into community charging, so we'll be learning and growing as we go there. And so I think there's opportunities for continued partnership and collaboration as well as goal setting for us as a department. Then, finally within charging, I'd also say there's movement afoot in the state around reliability that continues to be a key theme and concern. I'm optimistic once our NEVI funded chargers hit the street, which we cut a ribbon in Western Maryland last week on our first NEVI funded charger off of I-68, and we have 2 more coming online before the end of the year. But as those come on, the reliability of the public sector charging system, at least those that we have, will pick up. And I think there's greater opportunity for other publicly funded chargers. Thinking through how we do that well is important. And finally, incentives. I think we have appreciated our incentives. Some folks have said those incentives are not very good, and we understand why one might say that. We'd love to enter into some type of kind of an EV market evaluation with MEA and NDE and others to assess EV rebates for, a broad cross cut of vehicles to assess, what's the demand, what's the need, and then what's the greatest mover, both in terms of delivery model as well as cost or the like. But I think that that's an opportunity for us to kind of continue to move forward. With that, I will pause.
Joe, can I ask you a quick question? So you talked about an EV market assessment. I would imagine that work has been done at an Austin. No, I mean, isn't there lots of information out there about the EV market, about what incentivizes people to buy EVs? I'm curious what new work might net that the new concept.
I think for us, it's as much of a kind of market driver as it is as a delivery mechanism. Because I think, for example, one of the slides that our colleague just showed was, I believe it was Washington, is a point of sale rebate. I think that is a powerful tool that we do not have in the state. Earlier meetings, some would say that our investment level threshold was too low to actually incentivize change. And so I think doing some level of market assessment, if it's going to be on the private vehicle, medium heavy duty vehicle, buses, what have you, I think there's a finite set of dollars and dialing that as we look at this pivot period is helpful. But I think that there's a lot of analysis. I think the question is, how much do you actually have to do versus dialing towards recommendations?
Yes.
And I'll add, in the new landscape of the federal rollbacks, I think that there is we need to have a broader understanding. If $7,500 tax credit's not on the table, what does that mean for Maryland in sort of shifting those sales? So I think in this new landscape, a fresh approach and a fresh look at that market would be really helpful.
I hear that. I just want to caution against analysis paralysis. Again, there's a lot of info out there. Obviously the federal rollbacks will have an impact, but I think the main thing is still the main thing. And what incentivizes people to buy EVs is probably still very similar to what it was a year ago, if I had to guess. So I would say, if you feel strongly that additional work is needed, okay, but I think we need to just move with a little more haste than another study.
Can I just say, I think, right, the challenge always with these incentives is how do you determine, to Joe's point, we want to avoid as much free ridership as we can get, so to speak. We know, if you write the current incentive level, it's probably, there are people who are claiming the incentive who probably would have bought EV anyway. And then, on the other hand, it may not be enough for others to get them over the threshold. So I think like that, during the point of sale rebates and other convenience factors also are an issue, and the amount available. And so I think that's why we're always trying to figure that out, and that applies for any kind of incentive.
Not a scientific method for sure, but I bet if you went through all of the testimony that's been submitted over the last couple of years about this topic, you'll get a really good sense of where the people of Maryland are on it. Bo?
Be next. All right, so I threw together a few slides, and what I thought I would do is just share a handful of ideas of policies that have been enacted in other states or even globally that have been met with success. Just as some food for thought for this group. And we have a combination of policies that some of which can be enacted administratively, some will require, legislative lift, but all of them have histories and have demonstrated track records of not only working, but working to increase EV adoption at large. So next slide, if you please. So the first one is public fleet procurement, which our friends at the Climate Alliance touched on as well. There are a number of states with legislated targets for EV adoption, directing public agencies to spend their procurement dollars on an increasing annual volume to scoop up EVs. Included a lovely picture of, this is one of our trucks, Caltrans, which is California's Department of Transportation. Earlier this year procured 450 of our trucks. We're not advocating for Rivian only. It could be any EV truck. The benefits are, to the taxpayers themselves and to the state, reduced maintenance obligations, lower fuel costs and resiliency. We're of course reducing greenhouse gas emissions, blah, blah, blah. But the real value to public fleet procurement is leading by example. We're putting folks into electric vehicles who may otherwise kind of never be the likely adopter. They're driving it every day at work. Suddenly they're realizing what a great experience is. Now they're going to buy a new car and they're thinking about an EV. They're telling their friends about what a fun car it is to drive. Just as an example on the other side of the coin, in the private sector, we manufacture last mile delivery vans. Amazon now has over 20,000 of them on the road. Their drivers fight over who gets to drive them. They are better than their gas-powered alternatives, in part because they have heated and cooled seats and heated steering wheels, which does make a lot of difference. But the state can do this today. We are not winning bids on procurement contracts because we're receiving deferential treatment. We are competing directly with our gas-powered counterparts. What we need to see more broadly is leadership from the top down, because oftentimes this just isn't something that's kind of focused on. You know, the governor's team is not getting into the weeds and saying, hey, you know, you secretaries, where are your cars coming from? There are 100 other priorities. And so placing a small amount of emphasis on this can garner huge results. And if you want to take it a step further, the state is also providing procurement dollars to local governments across the state. It is not too difficult to say, if you're taking this money, you need to be holding yourselves to the same rules that we ourselves are following. And so this is for vehicles up and down the totem pole. You know, I live part-time in Washington, DC. All of DC's, meter maid cars are Chevy Bolts. They're cheap, they do the job. And when you kind of, I don't need to explain to most folks at this table that, you know, fleet vehicles live a pretty routine life. They start their day in the same place, they end their day. Getting charging situated for them is a one-time thing, and then you're off to the races. So this is something that we could start today. It's something I would love to see this working group consider as one of our recommendations. If you would hit the next slide, please. We're going to get more complicated now. And Megan put this bug in my ear. I wasn't going to bring it up, but a low carbon fuel standard. We have low carbon fuel standards in place in 3 states, California, Oregon, and Washington. New Mexico is building theirs out right now. We're in the midst of rulemaking. Essentially, low carbon fuel standards are market-driven regulatory policies that progressively reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuel in a given region. And essentially this cap trade program for fuel, put into motor vehicles at the end of the day. A lot of conversations we have, we're always looking for money, how to fund infrastructure. The reason that California in particular is so far ahead of the rest of the country in terms of infrastructure is that their LCFS program, having been in place for about 12 years, has generated over $1 billion that has been directly fed back into the infrastructure space. And this requires some administrative effort. It requires the build out of a small office within an existing environmental regulator, but it is doable. And it is meaningful and impactful and can move the needle. It's a big conversation, but I wanted to call it out here, especially as the conversation that's already been had here today, that money is an issue in all things. So this is an opportunity to generate revenue from, those contributing kind of more to greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. Okay.
Can you back up 1 second?
Yes.
With what you just said about California, they also have a lot of money from the cap and invest program.
Correct.
That's where a lot of.
Yes. And a lot of the cap and invest money, hopefully we'll find out in the next, will go to vehicle purchase incentives. There'll be some for infrastructure, but LCFS is most of their infrastructure budget in California. Policy number 3, I was super excited the other day to see in the news reporting on PG&E's vehicle to grid pilot. Admittedly, didn't even know it was happening, which led me down a rabbit hole, and it's awesome. Maryland is a leader on this. I think this is also something that we can and should consider including in our final report. Vehicle to grid technologies are in their nascency. But there is a huge opportunity for the EV owner, the utility, the ratepayer The example I always use, I use myself. I'm putting solar on my house right now, and I had my installer quote out the cost of home stationary storage, and it was a lot of money compared to the price I paid for my electric car. And wouldn't it be nice if I could just tap into my electric car to do this same feature? And in a lot of instances, folks are kind of looking at the very small opportunity here that our cars can power our houses in the event of a power outage. That's great. But fortunately, we live in 2025 and power outages are pretty rare and oftentimes pretty short. So good job across the table. The real value, though, is, okay, we've got 100,000 EVs on the road. What if we lived in a world where 100,000 of them could make themselves available to the utility for a certain percentage of their pack at certain times of the day? And now, rather than toggling on peaker plants when we have a rise in demand, we can tap into all these vehicles plugged in. And so BG&E with Ford is running a pilot right now. I don't know a ton of details based on other than what I've read in the headlines. But essentially my recommendation to this administration is to kind of stay on this, that you all are already ahead of the curve in so many instances. And as learnings are revealed, take every opportunity we can to expand access to it, because it is going to maximize the value of EV ownership to the end user. And if I can participate in market-based grid interaction and make money just because my car is plugged in, suddenly that EV becomes even more compelling versus its gas counterpart.
Let me ask you a question. I know Vanessa from board, Cynthia from board is on here. I think that's only, this program though, is only for the Ford car where they're using it as a generator, not other folks.
Yeah, so I don't know the specifics as to why it's limited only to Ford right now, but I have noticed we also have another program one level down, I call it BB1G, which is smart charge management. It's also similarly, more cars can participate, but in the utility programs, what I've noticed is depending on the make and model is a big part of determining if you can participate. But we have to have certain telemetry in the vehicle to be able to do it. So as these programs roll out, hopefully more can participate. It will come down to also the OEM making sure that their cars that they develop can take advantage of that as well. But yeah, I know that's a normal thing in these programs.
It is that what they're doing is that.
Yes.
Yes.
That's correct. This specific pilot is specific to Ford vehicles, but the goal would be to expand this beyond once the pilot is complete.
Is the technology proprietary to Ford? No.
No, that's also a feature, I think, of the school bus pilot, right?
Yeah, it's a part of the school bus pilot as well. So it shouldn't be, what they might be doing might be proprietary to Ford, but this idea shouldn't be. And the overall standards as it continues to evolve, I guess, I'm assuming Rivian's probably looked into making sure your cars are programmed to do it. So yes, I don't think it's proprietary. I think some of the important things we all need to think about as we go through. So my only dubious has always been it will degrade your battery life. So how much do I need to throw at the driver to convince you to do this? So it's great. I think it's a great demand management program for more demand response for the limited number of times in a year. I'm trying to use it, but if I'm trying to use it every day, that's where I become a little more suspect of the idea. But in terms of a couple times a year use, I think it will hopefully play out well.
Couple times a year, meaning where the car is charging the charger?
Correct. Like backpeaking.
Backpeaking.
Correct. Yeah.
You also need charging equipment that is two-way, like kind of wiring, right? Most people's homes right now don't have that kind of infrastructure.
That was my next question, Ian, is it possible to retrofit existing EVs and or existing EV infrastructure to have this technology?
EVs, no, but infrastructure, yes. But you're going to need to find the correct application, right? There's been this concept has been around since EVs showed up. And you want to just match the use case appropriately. We don't need DC fast chargers being able to go both ways. School buses make a ton of sense. But also it's a huge opportunity for kind of this multi-party benefit where there is a cost to this hardware up front. I, as, you know, the individual homeowner might be disinclined to buy that, but maybe the utility is interested in owning that bit of infrastructure as they own the meter on the side of my house, right? And so there's a whole lot of room to explore here. And the exciting thing is that Maryland is already in the pool. So, all right, now it's my most controversial slide of all. Is thinking about incentives and disincentives. You know, we can and we should have a conversation about the way that Maryland implements its current incentive. And it is objectively generous. It is also, as we've discussed ad nauseum, it's you know, unsustainable. And so how do we think about kind of broad applications of incentives that can kind of orient people towards EVs? The first that we've seen in a handful of states are luxury taxes on all vehicles, regardless of fuel type. Progressive taxes that kick in above a certain dollar threshold, and those dollars are then reinvested in, you know, strategic targeted incentives. Controversial, to be sure, but you know, look, the person buying the $100,000 car is not suddenly going to not buy it because they have to pay an extra $400 above, you know, the baseline. As a company that is selling cars in these jurisdictions and is subject to that, we can attest it's not the end of the world. The last one is the most complicated, and I've asked a few of my folks internally to do some research on this, because I don't know what is and is not like literally legal on the state of Maryland's part or on any state's part in this instance. But tolling does present a really interesting opportunity to incentivize EV adoption. The example that we always talk about is Oslo. Back in, I don't remember when it was, 2015, 2016, and very unique. They implemented congestion pricing. It was €8 a day to drive into Oslo. Norway just last week, 2 weeks ago, announced that they're at 96% EV adoption right now. 96% of all vehicles sold thus far in the year are electric. They're actually like going through their kind of broad incentives right now, like revisiting everything because they don't need to incentivize EVs quite the same way anymore. Maryland has a lot of toll roads. Could you hold the price steady for EV drivers and start pushing it up for everybody else? I don't know. But hey, this is a room of folks interested in crazy ideas. So that's my craziest one. And I thought I would keep you all guessing.
Thanks, Bo. That sounds great. Yeah, sure there'll be lots of public support
I
for
have
that one. Yeah,
Hey, we'll bring the EV folks out as well.
I hear you. Okay, any thoughts or questions for Bo, particularly on his last idea? Anyone have any thoughts?
I do, please don't ask me this problem.
Yeah. Yep.
On your policy number 2, the low carbon fuel standards, wanted to say this is an idea that we've been hearing more and more chatter about too. And so, we have actually been able to secure some technical assistance funding to do, some further investigation, not too lengthy analysis, but still investigate how that concept and some other alternative strategies could play out in Maryland, what that would look like from a pricing model, and what kind of revenue it would generate here. So, this is one of the recommendations that MBE was certainly planning to bring to the work group. Not that we're like at a stage where we're ready to hit go, but that this is an area where we absolutely see some opportunity in investigating it and have that technical assistance lined up to support that. On the first one, we can maybe follow up offline in the interest of time, but we'd love to learn more about how the fleet procurement legislation has played out in other states, what those models look like, what the requirements are, if it mirrors ACC and ACT or if it's some other approach, but we're definitely interested.
Can I ask a silly question? Let's say that we got like the utilities to transition to electric trucks. What happens when the power goes out and they have to get the power back on with the trucks that run on the power that's not running?
So I always start by saying, like, there's not going to be a world where we turn over an entire fleet overnight, right? With any fleet operator, you start by slotting out your first few cars and then slowly, increasing. In that instance, we've obviously got complications. We tell stories, looking to Florida, where they obviously have hurricanes. Electricity is oftentimes restored before access to gasoline is available. Gasoline pumps still need electricity to operate. Our industry actually worked with the state of Florida to kind of, and I'm sure Maryland has its own kind of disaster response, like schedule, who gets served first, hospitals. And electricity, just writ large, is kind of right up there. So it's a tough question, but it also like hasn't shown up as a crisis as of yet.
Maybe because the fleets are not advanced enough for it to be a real issue.
Well, I mean, they're right. They're not in volume enough to be sure. But even so, most oftentimes vehicles are charged. When they're sitting idle, most fleet operators have a pretty standard process that if it's parked, it's plugged. And so in an event where power goes out, it's probably already full.
It's, we don't have to harp on this, but again, like utilities, other things that are performing repairs, like it's not necessarily plugged in, right? So I think, but that's, I think, a different conversation on the truck side when you're talking about, I only thought about it because you brought up the fleet.
Yeah. And to be sure, like I'm always the first person to tell you when like an EV is not the right fit.
Yeah,
And there are plenty of applications where it's not the ideal fit right now, but there's a lot where it is. And
Yeah.
those are the ones to go after first. Pick the low-hanging fruit.
thoughts?
Oh, well, I was going to say number two again.
Oh, please, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
yeah.
So on number two, how does this work where California, where they're clearly already part of a cap and trade? We have our own cap and trade. So how is this additional to the existing cap and trade? Are they just charging them? Are these?
It is its own
tax?
It is its own dedicated thing, completely separate in California from Cap and Invest.
But for clarity, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Right, it's like the recommendation around a low carbon fuel standard doesn't necessarily come with a cap and trade aspect to it as well. And those are different recommendations. Actually, the mitigation work group actually recommended exploring not a cap and trade, excuse me, a low carbon fuel standard, which for trucking, I think is a much more viable option for if you can get the fuel here, right? And obviously that there's enough product to meet the demand, because you don't have to redo your entire fleet because it's dropping. So
The exciting thing about LCFS is that it can be anything. It is unique to each individual state, as opposed to ACC2 and ACT, where we're all copying and pasting California's homework. California is an example that we can look to, but if Maryland just decides to pursue this, it can look like whatever Maryland wants it to look like to best suit the state's needs.
Yeah, and two of those states don't have a capital invest program, right? It's just California and Washington, Oregon and New Mexico.
And then on number 4, incentives, this kind of gets into the discussion on point of sale. So like our energy efficiency program, we have a suite of offerings that are at point of sale, but then there's also midstream and upstream. Has there been any look into, does it make sense just to be trying to do what we, like, my view is if we can get us closer to price parity with the ICE vehicle, we can, then the infrastructure, right, discussions start to make a lot more sense. But until we're there, we're going to be looking at maybe a limited amount of the market when we go there. So I guess what incentives would be needed, I don't know, at the upstream level or something to get your manufacturing down? I guess, is that something that can happen? Or?
I mean, I think we are seeing, even without incentives, the price of EVs decline. Although, like the numbers, if you dig into like the Q3 numbers that were just released, like because of the rush of folks to jump in and get this credit, like you can't really rely on this. And there are still a lot of expensive EVs out there, our own included. And our aspiration is to work further into the market into the years ahead. But, the big picture is just these kind of big supply chain investments that are, hopefully going to be seen through in the years ahead of onshoring battery manufacturing, because that's the most expensive aspect of any electric car, right? So I don't know, it would be difficult for an individual state to do anything that like would radically impact, you know, that kind of industrial policy to the degree that it would.
So basically, point of sale.
Point of sale is, you know, unless there's some sort of incentive, and like in IRA, there was like an incentive for the implementation of batteries. I think that was 45W was the name of that tax credit. It's like there are things that can be done, but like if we're kind of squabbling over a few bucks for point of sale versus kind of applying that to me, it's still the same money, right? So.
So any other questions for Bo?
Just, so tying that discussion about the fourth recommendation and also to Joe's earlier comments about their need to do sort of some additional surveying and some of the concerns that you had about how much is already out there. And then hearing the commentary about how, you know, so this essentially, this recommendation number 4, which is essentially like a luxury tax, we're calling it, right? So knowing that there is a portion of the population that is high income earners, right, who is very likely to move forward with an EV regardless of what incentives are out there if they want an EV, right? Is Joe, on your survey needs, is there a way to do, I'll call it targeted demographic surveying? And when I say demographic, let's please not get into, I'm really talking about economic demographics, right? And where you live demographics. That would be more helpful in terms of understanding what barriers need to be overcome for those segments of the population with regards to adoption, because we know there's this contingent that is already going to buy EVs regardless. That's a lot. I know I probably didn't express that as cleanly as I wanted to. Maybe it made sense, right? But anyway.
No, I think it makes sense. And I think that that's an issue also with the tolling, right? When you think about equity and who actually owns EVs right now, if they were to increase tolling, we were to increase tolling just on ICE vehicles, are you disproportionately impacting certain sectors of the population who don't have EVs for a variety of reasons, right? So that's kind of like the number one thing that popped in my head on the tolling side, is that we would be punishing people for something that they may not be capable of doing.
Something that I think is going to be worth watching. The folks at the Climate Alliance mentioned Colorado's new program, which we just got the details on that last week. A big component of it is it requires a trade-in of an ICE vehicle. You know, and it's not some cash for clunkers thing. We're not, you know, taking these vehicles off the market, but we're only offering this, the state of Colorado is only offering this incentive to people who are trading in an internal combustion engine. And that may be something, you know, as you all are evaluating kind of options, you know, you're guaranteeing to get somebody new into an EV. And the fun thing that heartens me, despite the kind of headwinds that we're facing, is that survey after survey after survey shows that once people own an EV, they're pretty much with that technology for life, 9 out of 10. And so as we see this spike of the graph, even if adoption slows, re-upping is going to continue going, and those used EVs find their way onto the market. And, you know, one of the kind of lesser talked about federal policies that was impactful was the used EV tax credit. $4,000 on an EV under 20,000, all of a sudden, you know, in my neighborhood in DC, half the block has got Model 3s because they're cheap. So food for thought.
With, I know we're going to talk about education coming up. We're going to take a break first, but I do want to give an example of something, but I can wait.
Okay, let's make that a section. I just want to make sure that Sari gets an opportunity here, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll kind of transition into this. Is that okay? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Or just lay the break. So I'm sorry, I'm the LS staff attorney at Sierra Club, and I'm filling in for Josh Stebbins today. So thanks for giving us an opportunity to share our recommendations. We sent a letter that was a joint effort on behalf of Sierra Club, Earth Justice, Rivian, Maryland Living Conservation Voters, Community Concerned Scientists, and Environmental Defense Fund. We sent out several days ago, but just wanted to give the group an opportunity to discuss our recommendations here. So our first recommendation is sorry, like next. Sorry, no worries, thank you. First recommendation is that Maryland agencies complete construction of infrastructure using federal funds by 2028 at the latest, but as soon as possible. So Maryland has $300 available in various federal funds and is falling behind some other states in terms of implementing these, using these funds to build charging infrastructure. So it's really important that there be interim and final targets for constructing this charging infrastructure pursuant to these grants. That there be regular transparent reporting on state agencies' progress for meeting these goals. And then just like a sort of governor level task force and just an opportunity to really ensure that these agencies are on track and then if not apply corrective action to get them on track. And as that slide indicates, there's really a need to target the goals and the needs of the future. So for example, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed in 2021, but since then there are larger technologies, there are higher speed chargers, 250 to 350 kilowatts, as opposed to 150. And so the new charging infrastructure should be built with the future needs in mind, the 2030 and beyond. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So our next recommendation is utilities really need to be proactively upgrading their distribution grids in order to be able to provide power to the new chargers. Of course, if we manage to meet EV sales goals and install charging infrastructure quickly, but there's no power going to those chargers, then it will fail to meet our goals. So this is actually a really important recommendation that needs to be implemented more proactively. And then there are other actions that utilities can take as well, including us approving rates that would enable the kind of able to grid charging that Bo just discussed. And then providing fleet advisory services, flexible service interconnections, just other means of really supporting electrified vehicles. For example, there was a recent order in New York that required utilities to provide granular load forecasts through 2035 and potentially beyond, and then analyze whether each utility's distribution grid could handle those requirements, and then actually identify grid upgrades that were needed, and then seek approval from the commission for those time-sensitive grid upgrades. So this is something other states are taking action on, and it's a pretty important prerequisite for electrification. We can go to the next slide, please. So another important area to ensure that efficiency charging is in communities, especially underserved communities, and especially for residents in multi-unit dwellings. There are various policies that could provide more investment to community chargers, including Public Service Commission approving utility investments, DHCD potentially providing assistance with installation in especially more underserved communities. And then just there are federal grants, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure or CFI grant program that could be used and expedited in really targeted. Next slide, please. And I alluded to this earlier, but there would be a lot of value in a task force at the governor level. This could include representatives from various state agencies, including, of course, not limited to the PSC, NEA, NDE, DHCD, and it would just be designed to foster regular collaboration, communication among agencies. This could really be an avenue to ensure that federal funds are being implemented effectively and quickly. And there could be just like regular coordination on tasks like PSC incentives, like utility incentives for chargers, potential challenges to Trump administration efforts such as rolling back federal funds, but just other events that we'll see in the future from the Trump administration. It's really helpful to have like more of a task force meeting periodically to assess responses and consider steps to accelerate the adoption. Next slide, please. So this is pretty self-explanatory. I talked about this, but it's really important to keep the ACC and ACT regulations on the books, especially to keep their reporting requirements in place, ensure that those are being followed. And then just having an additional reporting requirement that really ensures manufacturers of both internal combustion engine vehicles and EVs are sharing data on their annual sales and just to get a feel for what's happening in the market, which will pave the way for other policy. And then similarly, the government should support any multi-state agreements on EV sales and use with the manufacturers. Next slide, please. And then here's some additional recommendations that we laid out in our letter that could improve EV adoption, including other means of funding EV purchases, both publicly through methods like green banks providing lower interest financing for such measures, or other funding mechanisms for EV school and transit buses, or potentially there are methods of improving private funding for EVs, such as pay truck fund or indirect source review rule, which would require fleet operators to pay fees to then use to defray the costs of acquiring EVs. Next slide, please. So this is pretty much the end, but yeah, we just wanted to say I've been a long process. There were some helpful process points that we really needed, but just to provide a rough timeline for growth and report that you all shared that, which we appreciate. And just guidelines for how we will achieve consensus or provide majority or minority use if consensus is not reached. So I'll end there, but I think it'd be helpful to hear folks' thoughts on these recommendations.
Folks, thoughts?
Okay. Really helpful stuff. Just wanted to share a process level thing when we're talking about the governor directing things and recommendations. Because the PSC is an independent agency, the governor can't necessarily direct them to do things. I looked into this, for example, when we set up the climate sub-cabinet, we couldn't make the PSC an official member. So that would need to see if we were to set up some sort of other secretarial level task force. We couldn't make the Attorney General or the PSC because they don't report directly to the governor. So just a couple of small things there. But I like some of the concepts that you introduced here, but I just thought I'd let you guys know that logistically in terms of the governor's authority, as much as he'd love to be able to tell the Attorney General and the chair of the PSC exactly.
And thanks for calling me. We're definitely aware of that. It's more of just if the report provided recommendations, right? And PCs or for the general assembly to legislate that those features.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. We also cover some of what you have on here in the climate sub-cabinet that we've had.
Yeah.
So a lot of this we could simply incorporate into what we're doing because we brought together all the secretaries of the agencies.
It's an interesting idea, Secretary. I always love not creating a new thing if you don't have to, especially if there's an existing forum to already do that. So that's a really interesting idea. Yeah, sorry.
One thing that I think about when I think about infrastructure upgrades, particularly utility grid type upgrades that are ratepayer funded, is how we sort of balance the need for infrastructure to support electric vehicles, while also understanding that there's a cost to it and we don't want to overbuild. I think this was discussed a little bit earlier in one of the earlier meetings. But I still wanted to flag it again. We know that ratepayer impacts are really important right now. Energy burdens. And so I think we have to figure out how to make sure that we don't overbuild where we don't need it too soon because of the cost impact, but we also make sure that the infrastructure is there, to support electric vehicle adoption. So I just think that that's something that we have to consider and try to get that balance right.
Yeah, if I could respond, that's something Sarah is really sensitive to because we're also super concerned about ratepayer impacts. We addressed this in the comments and extensively in various PhD proceedings, but there are studies from across the country, including from synapse, Berkeley labs, actually from a variety of sources showing that building this EV infrastructure reduces rates. It creates downward pressure. The increase in electricity sales creates kind of a Walmart type effect and then actually reduces rates for years. And we feel that the risk of needing to bring piecemeal build piecemeal infrastructure later on down the road when it's too late and close it for our greatest possible, but it is then proactively.
Just, sorry, on that, I mean, so I think, so we have the DSP, which is supposed to be kind of a public way for us all to make sure the utilities, distribution system planning process, where the utilities are publicly, like, we're making a much more open book, how they do their forecasts and making sure that they are like taking into account things like electric vehicles. So from a base growth perspective, like probably amongst the residential sector, like proactively trying to make sure that's there. We have a forum to make sure that's happening. Where I get more worried is when we're talking about these bigger, the depots, the highway charging for the big level 8 trucks, which are really discrete locations where we really don't know if they're going to come in. And that's then going to really put either the utility or more likely the ratepayer on the hook for unfunded or for infrastructure that is used or underused. And we're going to products that build a public charging program already. So is there any examples across any of these states where Rivian or Amazon are really fronting the money for the utilities to be sitting on the equipment they need in the future when those fleets show up, or anything where they're keeping the costs contained really to those who will eventually use it, instead of saying, let's once again have a residential ratepayer backed program that really isn't doing anything for them. It's really a gamble that's going to pay off.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just respond, like, in the face of the imperfect information about exactly where every single fleet will be, I don't think inaction is the right solution. I think there still needs to be targeted, calculated actions. In other states like New York and also Massachusetts and Colorado, California, there are mechanisms for utilities to be conducting outreach to any of the depot, large depots or fleet operators within their service territories, including fleet that have federal grants. And so they are planning, like in conjunction with these actors, that are planning to build infrastructure where it will be needed. If you're asking about like a different mechanism that would.
Well, I think I'm asking about the other rate. I mean, I know our utilities are doing some of that outreach. They've got through every, there's a whole tool dedicated for people like Amazon to basically say, I'm generally planning to build here in the future, so the utilities have some telemetry for that. So the industry is actually trying to get in front of that. And so, but at the same time, anything where utilities have to proactively buy the equipment, which in some cases, when I'm talking about level 8, we're talking about transformers, we're talking about whole substation possible. Big grid infrastructure investments that take years to build, which is what you're trying to get to, I think. Is the industry willing to kind of put their money where their mouth is and say, I'm willing to back that up, or take some of the risk on themselves and not just leave that to the utility of the ratepayer to back it? Have we seen that?
I don't know, I mean, I confirm the industry, but I don't know if there are situations where, I mean, I believe that there are like private investments because all the charging infrastructure, I don't know the extent to which like private companies like Rivian are funding like substations, because I know there's, there are mechanisms in place for utilities to do that, and then the utilities seek approval from the commission, they have to justify their expenses and prove it's just reasonable. So I mean, but
Great, following up on that. It's just, I'm just pointing out, that's very historic process. Like it's always after the infrastructure investment's been made, then we do it. It's usually money asked from Rivian or whoever caused the upgrade to happen. Versus this is saying spend the money up front, which would be in I think we compare that. So that's just some of the risks. I will say number 2, I'd love to sit down and talk with you all, because we've actually done, I think, a lot of what you put down here. In the second bullet point on recommendation number 2, or we issued orders on it, where we said, hey, the command charges, I've seen that come up in a couple of places. We've actually looked at it, found it wasn't actually, I think in a number of instances, actually work against the industry's interest, unless we're talking about a new charger. So anyways, the commission issued an order saying, hey, we're still interested in this. Here's, we want to come back, but here's changes that need to be made. So I think a lot of us, we are kind of working through the level, if we're going to go forward with any of these as a recommendation, kind of narrow it down to where we aren't currently looking or haven't previously ruled on it, unless you think that's wrong, in which case it's a recommendation. So yeah, then I agree on the dealing with the data problems. Thanks.
All right, we're going to skip our break. Sorry to do that to you all, but we're very close to the end of our time together, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to get through our agenda. Peter is not here today, so that presentation will be saved for a future meeting to the extent that you all have an agenda that has Peter on it. But I do want to turn it over to Cynthia and Muni to talk about education, the vehicle education campaign.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi there. Good morning, team. Thanks so much for having us. Quick question for you. Should I share my slides, or Katie, do you have a copy of our PDF?
Rudy, you could go ahead and share yours if you prefer.
Okay, that's terrifying, everybody. I hope I don't share something weird.
We have yours up. We have yours up. We have yours up. Hey, Muni.
You know, just in front of the whole state of Maryland.
Muni, can I say one thing? Is
Yes,
this Steve, first of all? So good to see you. I have to share this. You're going to find this very interesting. I think you all will too, because we're going to talk about education and why it's important. True story. Sunday, I'm at a friend's house. I noticed she has a new car. She has a new Acura gas car, right? Very nice SUV. And I thought, oh, you just got a new car. She said, yes. Then I see a RAV4 Toyota next to it. She's single. So I said, whose car is that? She said, oh, I just bought that one too. So I said, well, why did you buy, why do you have two SUVs, and why do you have the less expensive RAV4? She said, oh, girl, that car, the Acura, the gas on it is so bad. I don't get a lot of gas. So I bought a gas car that has more range on it. I said, you bought two gas cars when you have a garage, because they were in her garage. You could have gotten, are you serious? Here's the kicker, guys, don't judge. She works for MDE. Tell her I told her. Please, that's
What I
it.
take away from that, though, Secretary, is that you are always advocating for EVs. So, all right, Cynthia, I will turn it over to you to let you start.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm Cynthia Williams. I'm the Global Director for Vehicle Compliance at Ford Motor Company, and I'm also on the VLOS board. So it's my pleasure to work with Muni today to just give you an overview of what some of the things that we're doing at that organization. But again, thank you for the opportunity for speaking today. So if you move to the next slide, I'll just cover the vision and mission of VLOS. This is the agenda. Next slide. So VLOS is a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, which really our goal is to do EV education, so everyone can understand the benefits of EVs and work together to eliminate barriers. Next slide. Good, move to the next slide. So talking about the theory of change, and so one of the things that VLOS works together on is to pull together a framework which deploys programs, projects, partnerships, bring together partnerships, again, to eliminate and drive change in this area. VLOS, to me is critical in terms of how educating consumers, making them aware of the benefits of EVs, attacking upfront costs of the vehicles, and the charging infrastructure. That's one of the three main things that we think are barriers to EV adoption, as one of the other speakers talked about earlier today. And so we work together to try to eliminate those barriers. Next slide. This is our illustrious board of directors. As I mentioned, I am on the board, as well as Serena is on the board as well. Next slide. And more importantly, she's on the public policy board, which directs, they work together to address policy issues that we're facing in this industry. Next slide. And these are our members. Again, we're working together to eliminate barriers for EV adoption. And I'm going to turn it over to Muni now. She's going to talk about our key program, and that's really Electric for All, our Electric for All campaign, which really is again, simple media campaigns that we pull together to bust myths about EV.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cynthia. If we could go to the next slide, team. As Cynthia mentioned, my name is Mooney Krishna. I'm the head of business development here at Veloz. And before I talk about our programs, I want to point out very quickly that state agencies tend to fund infrastructure projects, vehicle incentives. The private sector tends to really work on the technology and specific projects. And there's a missing part of the puzzle that I think we've been talking about all day, which is that base level awareness, which is necessary to get more people into EVs and get more electric vehicle miles traveled and then emissions reduced. So we're here specifically to talk about the consumer facing side of the organization, which is we brand Electric for All. Next slide, please. And one more for me. So the hub of the Electric for All program and the call to action from everything that we do, whether it's a visual ad or a radio spot, flyers at in-person ride and drives, is to get folks to electricforall.org. And it's essentially a free to use brand neutral tool where you can get all the facts about going electric, shopping and comparing new and used electric vehicles, all the different ways of rideshare. But the important part is that it uses your zip code to show you all of the available local incentives for you. It's backed by JD Power data. And the website is available in 15 languages. The way we think about it is that if we're trying to change the world by offering a different fueling option, we also have to support the behavioral changes that come with it and help educate folks about how to make that easy. Next slide, please. So, and one more for me. But a website's a website. If it's got to have the information. So what we pulled is a quick view of a zip code in Baltimore. So about 300 different available new and used EVs in the area came up. And here's some of the ways in which we demonstrate. Here's the Maryland incentive. Here's the BGE incentive. So as Cynthia mentioned, if affordability is one of the key barriers to electrification, our goal is to show you all the ways to bring down the hood cost and of course, help with those energy costs for the ongoing maintenance as well. Next slide, please. But we've got to get folks to the website, and that's really where we do a lot of work here. And we've done everything from having former Governor Schwarzenegger dress up as a used car salesman to having a Sasquatch as a myth, busting myths about there not being available charging. And these types of campaigns is how we draw that hooky, we get people excited to go look at the website. It's really hard to do a commercial explaining all the tax credits and if you're eligible and if you're not. So we try to catch attention and then draw folks to get more info. Next slide, please. And one more for me. We're here today to talk about our very first national campaign. I want to take a moment to thank Secretary McElwain and her leadership in helping take the organization from the West Coast to the East Coast through her work. We've also this month, we'll be bringing in New Jersey DEP as well as NYSERDA. All of these efforts is what helps us to take what we've done in a couple states on the West throughout the nation. So right now, we know that there's a lot of misperception and confusion about EVs. And so we decided to take a pretty simple, no nonsense approach. No jargon, no fancy talk, just straight up facts to address 4 key messaging pillars: cost, range, the availability of charging, and incentives. The campaign, what it uses is we've tapped celebrated director Patrick Daughters. We're stepping away from the traditional motifs that you've seen in ads, using a more clean and simple visual style. It's called photoreal live action. Our boss describes it like the Barbie movie, but he has young daughters, so a lot of his references are like Taylor Swift and K-pop. So take that with a grain of salt. Let's go to the next slide. To help match that clean, straightforward campaign look, we also decided to go with a trusted, down-to-earth, approachable voice. And although today, what I'll do directly following today's meeting is send everybody these ads and make sure that you've got a link to it. But we were very, very lucky to have Nick Offerman generously lend his voice, Ron Swanson, to our videos. And what this does is the stylistic approach we took avoids a really overly aspirational salesmanship type approach, and instead works by building trust with viewers and allowing for the easy localization of individual messages. So let's go to, unfortunately, Katie, you're gonna hate me because I'm gonna make you bounce around in slides a lot. So let's go to the next slide, my friend. And this is not going to play, so really cool image of a gas engine. But next slide for me. In Maryland, we will be spending around $1 million, just short of $1 million from July 2025 launch through the end of June 2026. We're assuming that based on the spend will reach about 46 million total impressions. And we are meeting Marylanders everywhere they are, from their social media to linear TV like NBC, Peacock, digital billboards. And we're doing the rollout in phases that we started in July, and more to come soon on an in-person experiential phase. And we do have time for questions after this, team, so just want to make sure you know that. Next slide for me. Our media partnerships, along with Nick Offerman's help, also allows us to get a lot of what we call owned and earned impressions. So although we're spending $1 million in the state of Maryland, we're going to get millions and millions of impressions through some of these partnerships that we have, as well as being able to utilize the celebrity talent to get some hookiness in the way that we are distributing the campaign. One more slide, Katie. Just a couple notes here. So like I said, you want to meet people where they are. So we're on podcasts. I almost lost my mind. Smartless is my favorite podcast of all time. Hearing Jason Bateman talk about my company was one of the coolest moments. My cousins are all over social media. So the funny thing is, team, y'all probably won't see these ads, and I'll explain why. The reason is we are targeting folks in Maryland over the next 2 years who consider themselves likely or very likely to buy an EV. Many of you have electric vehicles, so you might not see these per se. So Katie, if we go to the next slide. What we hope you all see, though, is our digital billboards. So everywhere on that map that you see a dot is either a big billboard that's around town. We also have a partnership with Simon Mall's property. So again, just meeting folks exactly where they are. The campaign is built to speak to a really broad audience, though. Anyone who's even just a little bit curious about EVs. Since Maryland has an extremely strong infrastructure ratio, pretty high public awareness, and very favorable policies, our messaging focus in the state really emphasizes the ease of adoption, convenience of easily located charging stations, cost of ownership, et cetera. So next slide for me. And let's skip this one. Skip this one too. Sorry. Another thing that we just launched was the social macro influencer campaign. So earlier in today's meeting, we talked about how did folks talk about the federal tax credit before it sunsetted? Veloz actually pulled up $2.5 million of our planned spend into this last quarter, and a lot of that was spent in the Eastern Seaboard, ensuring folks knew that the federal tax credit was going to inspire. And part of how we did that was we worked with 5 diverse social macro influencers. So these are folks that have 1 million plus or more followers on TikTok, Instagram, et cetera. And they were asked to bring really relatable content to life surrounding this one message. The federal government wants to give you money to buy an EV. So that's how we sort of talked about it, instead of taking what was a little bit of a negative that it was going away and making it a positive statement. Next slide. And one more for me. In addition, we are working with community-based organizations throughout the nation. A few actually CBOs from Maryland recently attended a webinar that we did. We are offering a free-to-use, brand neutral toolkit. It's online. Everything's in Spanish and in English. What we do is we've got all the assets available. And so if we are spending all of this money on the creative, we want to be able to share this with CBOs that have deep relationships in communities that Veloz doesn't necessarily have quite yet. So this making sure that we support the entire ZEV ecosystem and folks that have worked for years in Maryland, just getting them the things that they need. Next slide. All right, so what is this achieving? Next slide for me, Katie. So we're really excited. In the first quarter, we hit about 1.4 billion total impressions nationwide. For those of you, to give an example, the last Gap commercial that was really popular hit about a billion impressions in 6 months. So it randomly outpaced Gap, which we're excited about. But what's really, really important on this slide is actually website visits. So for us, that's the conversion metric. And these are visits that we track from all the paid and organic creative across all of those channels, folks that actually go to electricforall.org. We then further break that down into 1.3 million conversions. And conversions are identified as really meaningful actions taken when folks are at electricforall.org. So that's clicking around the website, looking at the incentives, et cetera. We gather and analyze these data points on a quarterly basis to both, of course, assess the life cycle performance, but we also want to see, is this campaign really driving EV awareness or growth? When you're working on a campaign for a year before it launches, you get a little nosebleed. So you have to make sure that folks are actually really enjoying it and that it's driving action. We also use this data to drive optimization of the campaign and inform each kind of phase of it. One more slide for me. So in Maryland, this quarter, we had 21,000 web sessions on electricforall.org. And that is actually quite linear to population in the sense of Maryland is about 1% of the total nation's, or 1.84% of about the nation's total population. And the web sessions that we saw was about 1.3% of the total web sessions. So that is me freaking out that 21,000 seemed a little light compared to 1.3 million. So did some quick researching there. So I wanted to share a little bit of insights that we have learned through our intelligence tool called Resonate, which piggybacks on the campaign to tap into what's resonating, pun intended, with folks who are interacting with the creative. We found some really interesting insights about Marylanders. One is cost about vehicles was not in the top 3, not in the top 5, actually barely in the top 10 as the barriers to buying an electric vehicle. In fact, the top 3 were listed as limited charging infrastructure, charging time, and range anxiety. Knowing that Maryland has one of the highest ports per capita in terms of ratio, this reveals to us that we need to do a little bit more educating the consumer and folks about where charging is available near them. And certainly Veloz is here to help with that. And we're going to be working on, that's how we'll help to pivot the next quarter of the campaign in Maryland. Interestingly enough, the state also, and this comes from about 300,000 folks, individual Marylanders that this information is driven from. So we found that the state, they're very prioritized on technology and elegance. There's a real emotional connection to the vehicle. The car is an expression of myself. I enjoy driving. So it suggests an emotional resonance with driving electric as opposed to a cost-driven resonance. One thing that we also saw was that Marylanders that are thinking about electric vehicles feel guilty about the environmental impact. It's over-indexed almost 6 times over the national baseline. So in all this, what this boils down to is price and practicality are playing a less of a role than function now, than more needing to know where the charging stations are. So team, if we can just go to the next slide, what Cynthia and I would love to do is open this up to discussion, ask questions, and find ways to drive more of this campaign throughout the state and see how we can work together to get this in the hands of more folks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation. Thoughts from the group? Questions? Comments?
I think that last bullet is very telling amongst people who are likely to purchase an EV, right, in the next 2 years about price and practicality.
Right.
We can suggest where we should be dedicating our resources.
Right. Team is a former charge pointer that has taken advantage of Maryland incentive charging programs for a decade. The concept around the lack of charging, that's what I found really interesting. So that's actually pretty easy to overcome with more information, more customization of the campaign, our state agencies, taking a hard look at how we're talking about where the charging stations are. It can actually, that's a little bit easier than electricity is too expensive to deal with.
You make a really good point as we talk about what incentives you really want to focus on. The the tax credit versus, EV charging infrastructure, it seems like that really helps. That really helps, crystallize, what consumers are there.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I think signage is going to be key to that. We have to highlight where chargers are located, and they have to be clear, safe places where people feel that they can go to charge. So I think we could all work together on that together.
A question, do you do follow-up with, have you done any similar sort of survey work with people who have already, who, were at this stage and now they've made the conversion, and then gaining data on sort of how their post-purchase experience compares to their pre-purchase anxieties? Then, just curious.
No, that's a great question. And actually, just right now, the campaign team is working on putting together the research phase of the program. And that comes after you get the first quarter of data. So if you'll allow me, I'll follow up with you on how that's all going to go.
But just from a Ford Motor Company perspective, all the folks that have made the switch to electric, they love the vehicles. They said they'll never switch back. And most folks, if they can, they charge at home. And that's the most convenient factor. So those are some of the facts that we follow up on.
Just one question. So we hear all the time, this is just supporting, I think things that a lot of us have heard, that range anxiety and charging infrastructure are major impediments. And so on the one hand, I guess my question is, do we know how much it's the actual lack of charging infrastructure in certain places, and how much of it is perception about what is available? And, the same obviously goes for range anxiety. Do we have it? Because that could have an impact on where we want to spend our resources, right? Is it a lot of it on education, or is it more of it actually on getting more charging infrastructure in the ground?
Yeah, that's a great point. Forgive me, everyone, having like an allergy attack over here. So this is where I think Veloz could very much help to support. Secretary McElwain has been pushing and requesting this support, sort of mapping population to charging stations. For example, it helps with talking points, right? So for example, this activity was performed alongside the governor's office in California. And one of the key talking points given is that 95% of Californians live within 5 miles of a charging station. So you get these sort of key bullet points. Or another one that a Veloz-driven piece of talking point that Governor Newsom uses is that there are more charging ports than gas station nozzles in the state. So we are hoping to be able to work with the state of Maryland and deliver some of those talking points as well. We do think it's perception. My nickname back in the day used to be Hagerstown Mooney because I was constantly installing charging stations in the north of the state. So I myself can attest to it. But, for folks that don't know where to seek that information, we want to have, clear direction, clear information, and quick elevator pitches for all of you to be able to talk about that.
I'll say that I'm sorry, just quickly. It's perception, but it's true too. So our comptroller here in Maryland continues to call me to apologize because she has to get rid of her EV that she's had for 7 years. She says, I had to call to tell you, but I have to do it. And I asked her why. And she said, because I don't have a charger near me. And wherever she lives, she has to go next door to a building that has a charger, keep her car there overnight to charge. It's $20 overnight. So of course I tried to talk her out of it, but so there are more people like her. So we do need to have more chargers on the streets by the park, when you park, instead of a parking meter, maybe a charger, right? So people have more access to charging. So some of it is not so true because I think the ratio in Maryland is pretty high. Is it not? What is it, Chris?
The chargers per vehicle, I think we're about 20 vehicles per publicly available.
And what is the average? What is the not the average, but what is the standard?
the more the better, the more chargers per better to bring that ratio down. But on the other hand, as range and charging speed increases, obviously something like 15 would be better than 20, I think.
Okay. And I think, we'll come to you in a second. This specific situation that the secretary is talking about, we're talking about city living and not having a guaranteed parking spot in front of your house. So even if you were to install charging infrastructure, especially where the comptroller lives, there's very little guarantee that you're going to be able to park close enough to your charger to actually plug it in, right? And so I think there's a different solution that is needed for areas like Baltimore City where parking is not guaranteed in front of your home.
To the secretary's point though, I mean, so there are converts that love the vehicle and then sell it, right?
Yeah.
To their friends, but those that have a bad experience, and there's far too many of those in terms of reliability when you show up for lack of access, when and where you need it. Those folks sell their cars and they tell everybody about this is my anecdotal experience from my family too, right? They sell them. And then they tell everybody about it. And so I think at the end of the day, it's as much access. I think we're doing well. Morgan will give some stats in a second to answer the question, but it's also about that reliability component. Because like when you go to fill up your gas powered car, it's available when and where you need it. And unfortunately, we're just not there from a reliability perspective yet. But you want to give the stats?
Sure. So to build on what Chris was saying related to Maryland stats as of the end of September, there's we're too shy of 148,000 registered EVs. That's 24 EVs per 1,000 people. We have just over 1,700 charging stations and over 5,300 ports. That equates to 0.87 ports per 1,000 people.
Isn't there a standard that is
used
by an industry that says?
I'd have to pull the national.
Okay, let's circle back on that. We're almost out of time, so.
Can I say one quick thing?
Sure.
Because I love the comment about bringing kind of proliferating L2, I think is one that has a lot of product rate here, which is very exciting. With charging or lack of charging access, it's oftentimes a perception because if you don't own an EV, especially DC charging stations don't look like gas stations. They're at a mall, they're at a grocery store, there's just a couple posts hanging out. And so John Q. Public doesn't pay attention. As we're moving towards universal charging standard across EVs starting in model year 2027, is there a world that we can start putting up EV charging signs on highway exit?
Yeah.
We should do that.
Yes, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely up for grabs in terms of our recommendations that we are good segue, Bo. Back into our closing here. Thanks everybody for a robust discussion today. Thank you for everybody who presented. I really enjoyed the discussion. I think it's important. I think we're getting closer to a set of recommendations. The goal is consensus. I wanted to lift up your question about what to do, in terms of a lack of consensus. I'm still of the mindset that we're going to reach consensus, but I will tell you if there is if that is not the case, we will figure out a way to represent the differing perspectives. Okay, but my hope is still consensus. So again, work group members, you'll get a link after this to submit your recommendations. The team will work to combine, there'll be a lot that are the same, a lot that are similar. And so the team will kind of work to put those into more concise bullets and then circulate around. And then we'll have a robust discussion at the November meeting about the recommendations. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and week.